Karen thought she was doing the right thing, reporting her neighbor's dilapidated fence. But she had no idea that ancient wooden structure was a protected historical landmark, or that her call would set off a chain reaction of fury, subterfuge, and bitter revenge that would threaten to tear the neighborhood apart. The morning started like any other for Tom. A strong cup of coffee, a quick check of the news, and a look out the kitchen window at the ramshackle wooden fence dividing his property from his neighbor Karen's. He'd been meaning to get around to fixing that eyesore, but with work and family obligations, it had fallen to the bottom of his priority list. As he sipped his coffee, lost in thought, his phone suddenly began to buzz. He glanced down to see an unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. "Hello, this is Tom." "Mr. Johnson, this is Officer Williams from the City Historic Preservation Department. I'm calling about a report we received regarding the fence on your property." Tom's heart skipped a beat. "My fence? What about it?" "Well, we've received a complaint that it's in a state of disrepair and needs to be addressed. As you may know, your fence is designated as a protected historic landmark, so any modifications or demolition would require special permission." "A historic landmark?" Tom replied, dumbfounded. "I had no idea. I was just going to fix it up a bit, maybe replace a few boards. Is that going to be a problem?" "I'm afraid so, Mr. Johnson. Given the fence's protected status, you'll need to go through the proper channels to make any changes, and the complainant has requested we take immediate action." Tom's brow furrowed as the realization dawned on him. Wait a minute, who filed this complaint? There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "I'm sorry, but I'm not able to disclose the name of the individual who reported the issue. However, I can tell you that we take these matters very seriously, and will need you to cease any work on the fence until we can conduct a full assessment." Rage began to boil inside Tom as he put the pieces together. Karen, that nosy busybody next door. I should have known. "I understand your frustration, Mr. Johnson, but I must insist that you refrain from any unauthorized modifications to the fence. An inspector will be out to evaluate the situation within the next 48 hours. In the meantime, please do not take any action. Is that clear?" Tom gripped the phone tightly, his knuckles turning white. Crystal. He disconnected the call and slammed the device down on the kitchen counter, his mind racing. There was no way he was going to let Karen get away with this. Not without a fight. Tom burst out the front door, striding over to the sagging wooden fence that separated his property from Karen's. He paused for a moment, running his fingers along the weathered boards, feeling the character and history etched into the grain. This fence was more than just an eyesore to him. It was a link to the past, a tangible reminder of the neighborhood's heritage. And now, thanks to his meddlesome neighbor, it was in jeopardy. He stormed over to Karen's front door and started pounding furiously. After a few moments, the door swung open to reveal Karen, a concerned look on her face. "Tom, what on earth?" "You know damn well what, Karen," he shouted, jabbing an accusatory finger in her direction. "How dare you file a complaint about my fence without even talking to me first?" Karen blinked in surprise. "Your fence? But it's an absolute eyesore, Tom. I was just trying to do the right thing and get it fixed up before it becomes a hazard. I had no idea it was some kind of historic landmark." "Well, it is," Tom growled. "And now the Historic Preservation Department is threatening to come down on me if I so much as touch it. You've put me in a real bind here, Karen." Karen's face fell. "Oh my, I had no idea. I was just trying to improve the look of the neighborhood. I'm so sorry, Tom. Is there anything I can do to help?" Tom let out a derisive laugh. "Help? After you went behind my back and got the authorities involved? I don't think so." He leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing. "You better hope you haven't screwed this up for me, Karen. Because if I lose that fence, it's going to be on you." He turned on his heel and stormed back to his own property, leaving a stunned and worried Karen standing in her doorway. Tom knew he had to act fast if he was going to save his beloved fence from demolition. But what could he possibly do? Tom paced back and forth in his kitchen, his mind racing. He had to figure out a way to stop the Historic Preservation Department from tearing down his beloved fence, and he had to do it quickly. The phone call from the officer had made it clear they were taking this complaint seriously, and they wouldn't hesitate to take action against him if he tried to make any unauthorized modifications. But he couldn't just sit back and let them destroy a piece of the neighborhood's history, not on his watch. He paused, an idea forming in his mind. Maybe he couldn't physically work on the fence himself, but that didn't mean he couldn't find another way to protect it. Grabbing his laptop, he began furiously typing, searching for any information he could find on the history of his property and the fence itself. After hours of digging, he finally stumbled upon a motherlode of information: old newspaper clippings, historical records, and even a detailed architectural survey that had been conducted on the fence years ago. Apparently, the weathered wooden structure was over a century old and had been painstakingly handcrafted by the original owners of his home. A smile slowly spread across Tom's face as he read through the details. This wasn't just some rundown eyesore. This was a genuine historical treasure, a link to the neighborhood's past that deserved to be preserved. And if the preservation department was going to insist on getting involved, he was going to make damn sure they knew exactly what they were dealing with. Grabbing his phone, he quickly dialed the number of the officer who had called him earlier. "Officer Williams, this is Tom Johnson. I need to talk to you about that fence on my property." Over the next hour, Tom laid out his case in meticulous detail, providing the officer with all the historical documentation he had uncovered. He argued passionately about the fence's significance, its unique craftsmanship, and the importance of preserving this piece of the neighborhood's heritage. By the time he was finished, the officer sounded thoroughly convinced. "Mr. Johnson, I have to say, I had no idea the fence was of such historical importance. This changes things considerably. I'll need to confer with my superiors, but based on the information you've provided, I don't foresee any issues with you moving forward with necessary repairs, as long as you follow proper preservation protocols." Tom let out a sigh of relief. "Thank you, officer. You have no idea how much this means to me." As he hung up the phone, he couldn't help but glance over at the fence, a newfound sense of pride swelling in his chest. He bought this house because of that fence, because of the connection it represented to the neighborhood's storied past. And he'd be damned if he was going to let Karen or anyone else take that away from him. With the preservation department temporarily pacified, Tom turned his attention to his next problem: his nosy neighbor, Karen. He knew he couldn't let her off the hook for the trouble she'd caused, not after she'd gone behind his back and reported the fence without so much as a heads up. As he pondered his next move, an idea began to form in his mind. If Karen was so concerned about the appearance of the neighborhood, maybe he could use that to his advantage. After all, the fence was now a protected historical landmark, and he had the preservation department's blessing to make the necessary repairs. He strode back over to Karen's front door, this time with a more conciliatory expression on his face. When she answered, he put on his most apologetic tone. "Karen, I wanted to come over and apologize for how I reacted earlier. You were just trying to help, and I shouldn't have jumped down your throat like that." Karen blinked in surprise. "Oh, Tom, I'm the one who should be apologizing. I had no idea the fence was so important. I was just trying to tidy up the neighborhood, but I never meant to cause you any trouble." I know, Tom sighed, "and I really do appreciate your concern. The thing is, the preservation department says I'm actually required to maintain the fence, since it's a protected historical landmark." He paused, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. "And they said if I don't keep it in good repair, they could actually fine me or even order it to be demolished." Karen's eyes went wide. "Demolished? Oh my goodness, we can't let that happen." That fence is such a lovely part of the neighborhood's history. Tom nodded solemnly. Exactly. And that's why I was hoping you might be willing to, well, lend a hand. I'm going to need to do some work on it to make sure it's up to their standards, and an extra set of hands would really help speed things along. Karen's face lit up. Of course, Tom. I'd be happy to help in any way I can. Just tell me what you need me to do. Tom couldn't help but smile inwardly. Well, first of all, I'm going to need to get a permit from the Preservation Department to do the repairs. In the meantime, maybe you could go ahead and start clearing away some of the overgrowth around the base of the fence. That would be a big help. Consider it done, Karen exclaimed, already hurrying off to retrieve her gardening tools. Just let me know as soon as you have that permit, and I'll be right over to lend a hand. As Karen disappeared into her garage, Tom allowed himself a small, satisfied grin. With Karen's help, and her obsession with the neighborhood's appearance, he might just be able to get the fence restored without any further interference from the Preservation Department. And once that was taken care of, he could start planning his real revenge. Over the next few days, Tom worked tirelessly to secure the necessary permits and approvals from the Historic Preservation Department. He meticulously documented every step of the restoration process, ensuring he followed their protocols to the letter. All the while, Karen diligently cleared away the overgrowth and debris around the base of the fence, her enthusiasm for the project never waning. As the work progressed, Tom couldn't help but feel a growing sense of satisfaction. Not only was he getting to preserve a beloved piece of the neighborhood's history, but he was also managing to manipulate Karen into doing his bidding. It was a delicious irony that filled him with a twisted sense of glee. Finally, the day came when the Preservation Department's inspector arrived to give the fence a final inspection. Tom greeted the man warmly, leading him on a detailed tour of the restoration work. As you can see, we've taken great care to preserve the original craftsmanship and materials, Tom explained, running his hand along the freshly sanded boards. And we've made sure to address any structural issues that could have compromised the fence's integrity. The inspector nodded approvingly, carefully examining the work. Impressive, Mr. Johnson. I have to say, I'm quite pleased with the level of attention to detail here. This fence is clearly in good hands. Tom couldn't help but glance over at Karen, who stood beaming nearby. Well, I have to give a lot of the credit to my neighbor, Karen. She's been an absolute godsend, helping with the cleanup and restoration work. The inspector turned to Karen, offering her a warm smile. Then I thank you, ma'am, for your assistance in preserving this important piece of history. It's wonderful to see the community coming together like this. Karen's chest swelled with pride. It's been my pleasure. This fence means so much to the neighborhood, and I'm just glad I could do my part to help. As the inspector completed his final inspection and gave the project his seal of approval, Tom couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. Not only had he saved his beloved fence, but he'd managed to make Karen an unwitting accomplice in the whole affair. Now, with the Preservation Department off his back, he could finally start plotting his true revenge against the meddlesome woman, and he had a feeling it was going to be a deliciously satisfying experience. As the sun set on the freshly restored fence, Tom couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. Not only had he saved this beloved piece of the neighborhood's history, but he'd managed to do it by manipulating his nosy neighbor, Karen, into becoming an unwitting accomplice. Now that the Preservation Department was satisfied and off his back, Tom could finally turn his attention to the real reason he'd gone through all this trouble, exacting his revenge on Karen. He knew Karen's greatest weakness was her obsession with the appearance and reputation of the neighborhood. So as he sat in his living room, staring out at the pristine fence, an idea began to take shape in his mind. The next morning, Tom made his way over to Karen's house, a concerned expression on his face. When she answered the door, he immediately launched into his performance. Karen, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I think we may have a serious problem with the fence. Karen's brow furrowed with worry. The fence? But I thought the inspector approved all the work we did. What's wrong? Well, that's just it, Tom said, shaking his head gravely. The inspector missed something. A potential structural issue that could be a real safety hazard. I've been doing some more research, and it turns out this fence may not be as sturdy as we thought. Karen's eyes widened in alarm. A safety hazard. Oh my goodness, we need to get the preservation department back out here right away. Tom raised a hand, trying to calm her. Easy, Karen. I've already contacted them, and they're sending someone to take a closer look. In the meantime, they've advised us to avoid the fence entirely, just to be on the safe side. Avoid the fence? Karen gasped. But what about the neighborhood? People are going to see that run-down eyesore and think our whole street is falling apart. Tom nodded solemnly. I know. That's why I wanted to come over and give you a heads up. I know how much you care about the appearance of the neighborhood. Karen began to pace anxiously. This is terrible, Tom. Absolutely terrible. We have to do something. I can't let that fence turn into an embarrassment for the whole street. Well, unfortunately, my hands are tied until the preservation department gives us the all clear, Tom said, shrugging helplessly. In the meantime, maybe you could start thinking of ways to, I don't know, conceal a fence or something. Just to keep up appearances, you know. Karen's eyes narrowed in determination. Conceal a fence? Yes, that could work. Oh, I'll figure something out, Tom. Don't you worry. We can't let that eyesore ruin everything I've worked so hard for. As Karen hurried back into her house, Tom allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. His plan was already in motion, and he couldn't wait to see what lengths Karen would go to in order to hide the dangerous fence from public view. Over the next few days, Tom watched with barely concealed glee as Karen sprang into action, determined to hide the dangerous fence from the prying eyes of the neighborhood. First, she ordered a massive tarp to be draped over the entire structure, effectively obscuring it from view. But that wasn't enough for the obsessive Karen. She then began landscaping around the perimeter, planting a dense row of tall shrubs to further conceal the offending fence. Tom had to stifle a laugh every time he saw her out there, meticulously fussing over the placement of each plant, her brow furrowed in concentration. It was clear that the idea of her precious neighborhood being tarnished by his dilapidated fence was keeping her up at night. And Tom was more than happy to fan the flames of her paranoia. Whenever they passed each other on the street, he would shake his head solemnly and murmur something about the preservation department's concerns. They're really taking this seriously, Karen, he'd say, his voice laced with worry. I just hope we can get it resolved before anyone notices. Karen would nod emphatically, her eyes wide with alarm. Don't worry, Tom. I'm on it. I'll make sure no one even knows that fence is there. The neighborhood's reputation is my top priority. As the weeks wore on, Karen's efforts only intensified. She planted more shrubs, added decorative planters, and even commissioned a custom-built wooden trellis to further obscure the fence from view. Tom could practically see the dollar signs racking up in her mind as she sank more and more money into this fruitless endeavor. Meanwhile, the preservation department never did show up for a second inspection. Tom had made sure to string Karen along, feeding her just enough information to keep her in a perpetual state of panic. And the best part was, he hadn't had to lift a finger. Karen was doing all the work for him, driven by her own neurotic obsession with neighborhood appearances. It was a delicious form of revenge, watching her waste her time and resources on something that was entirely a figment of his imagination. As the summer sun began to fade, Tom gazed out at the fence, now almost completely hidden behind Karen's elaborate landscaping efforts. He couldn't help but feel a sense of twisted satisfaction. Enjoy it while it lasts, Karen, he murmured to himself. Because once I'm done with you, this whole neighborhood is going to know the truth. The day of reckoning had finally arrived. Tom had spent weeks meticulously planning his revenge on Karen, and now the time had come to execute his scheme. He had made sure to keep the pressure on Karen, constantly hinting at the preservation department's supposed concerns and the urgent need to conceal the hazardous fence. And true to form, the obsessive woman had risen to the occasion, sinking more and more money into elaborate landscaping efforts to hide the offending structure from view. Now, as Tom stood in his living room, gazing out at the meticulously manicured facade Karen had created, he couldn't help but feel a sense of wicked satisfaction. All of her hard work, all of her desperate attempts to preserve the neighborhood's pristine image, were about to come crashing down. With a grin, he picked up the phone and dialed the number for the local news station. "Yes, hello. This is Tom Johnson. I have a story I think you'd be very interested in." The next day, as Karen was tending to her carefully curated garden, she heard the unmistakable sound of a news van pulling up outside. Confused, she hurried to the front of her property, just in time to see a reporter and camera crew disembarking. "Excuse me, ma'am, are you Karen Peterson?" the reporter asked, approaching her with a microphone. "Ah, yes, that's me," Karen stammered, her heart racing. "What's going on?" "We've received a tip about a century-old historic landmark in your neighborhood that's in danger of being concealed," the reporter explained. "We'd like to get your take on the situation." Karen's face paled. "Historic landmark? But I don't know anything about that." The reporter's expression hardened. "Well, according to our sources, you've been actively trying to hide this landmark from public view. Is that true?" Karen opened and closed her mouth, struggling to find the words. I was just trying to improve the appearance of the neighborhood. I had no idea it was a historic." But before she could finish, the reporter cut her off. "So you're admitting to deliberately concealing a protected historical structure. That's a very serious offense, Mrs. Peterson." Karen's eyes went wide with horror as the camera crew began to fan out, their lenses trained on the elaborately landscaped fence. She whirled around, searching frantically for Tom, only to find him standing on his porch, a smug grin plastered across his face. "Tom, you did this, didn't you?" she cried, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. Tom simply shrugged, his expression one of feigned innocence. "I don't know what you're talking about, Karen. I was just trying to save a piece of the neighborhood's history. You're the one who decided to try and hide it." As the news crew swarmed around the fence, documenting every inch of Karen's elaborate concealment efforts, the realization dawned on her. She had fallen right into Tom's trap, and now her reputation, and possibly her freedom, hung in the balance. With a sinking feeling, Karen knew that this was one battle she was going to lose. And Tom, the once unassuming neighbor, had emerged victorious, his revenge exacted with a delicious, agonizing precision.